What's up guys, Kit here, back with another video. Today if you guys are reading the International Fraudulent Conveyances and Bankruptcy Code of the New York Law Journal. I'll leave a link to this down in the description box below, along for email. You'll email us at themongs@gmail.com for private consultation. And without further ado, let's get right into it. International Fraudulent Conveyances and Bankruptcy Code 523A.2.A New York Law Journal, September 25th, 2017, Monday. Copyright 2017 ALM Media Properties, LLC, all right preserved. Further duplication without permission is prohibited. New York Law Journal. Section Corporate Reconstruction and Bankruptcy. Page Section 9, Volume 25, Number 59. Length 1,570 words. Byline Carlos J. Cuevas. Body. Bankruptcy Code 523A2.A renders non-dischargeable debts obtained through fraud without the use of a written financial statement. A discharge under Section 727, 1141, 1228 of this title does not discharge an individual debtor from any debt. 2. For money, property, services, or an extension, renewal, or refinancing of credit to the extent obtained by A. False pretenses, a false representation, or actual fraud other than a statement representing the debtor's or an insider's financial condition. 11 U.S.C. 523A2/A. In Husky International Electronics v. Ritz, 136, Fond 581, 2016, the U.S. Supreme Court addressed the issue of whether an actual fraudulent representation is required to bring a fraudulent scheme within the purview of Bankruptcy Code. In Husky International Electronics sold products to Chrysalis Manufacturing, a company in which the debtor was a shareholder and director. The debtor transferred some of Chrysalis' assets to other companies that he controlled. In May 2009, Husky commenced an action against the debtor to have the debtor declared responsible for his debt. Husky argued that the debtor's intercompany transfers constituted actual fraud under a Texas law that permits a creditor to hold a shareholder responsible for a corporate debt. Thereafter, in December 2009, the debtor filed for Chapter 7. Husky filed an adversary proceeding seeking to have his debt declared non-dischargeable under Bankruptcy Code because the intercompany scheme constituted actual fraud. The Supreme Court held that the phrase actual fraud, as used in Bankruptcy Code, encompasses international fraudulent conveyance schemes that can be effectuated without a false representation. The court commenced its analysis by examining the evolution of Bankruptcy Code. The phrase actual fraud was inserted into the section as part of the comprehensive enactment of the 1978 Bankruptcy Code to cement the phrase a false representation. It is highly doubtful that Congress intended that actual fraud have the same meaning as a false representation. The historical meaning of actual fraud encompasses the conduct of an international fraudulent conveyance, a transfer scheme designed to hinder the collection of a debt. Bankruptcy Code is interpreted in a manner that is consistent with the common law elements contained in the statute. The court stated, actual fraud has two parts. Actual fraud has two parts, actual and fraud. The word actual has a simple meaning in the context of common law fraud. It denotes any fraud that involves moral turpitude or international wrong. Neal v. Clark, 95 U.S. 704, 709/24, 1878. Actual fraud stands in contrast to implied fraud or fraud in law, which describe acts of deception that may exist without the imputation of bad faith or immorality. Thus, anything that counts as fraud and is done with wrongful intent is actual fraud. The court was reluctant to adopt a definition of fraud for all times. Rather, it was sufficient that, historically, since the commencement of English bankruptcy practice, that the concept of fraud has embraced fraudulent conveyances. The Statute of 13, Elizabeth prohibited fraudulent conveyances. The court stated, that statute, also called the Fraudulent Conveyances Act of 1571, identified as fraud, fagin conveyance, and fraudulent firmidites, diffidus, granulus alienations, and conveyances made with intent to delay, hinder, or defraud creditors. Parliament made it fraudulent to hide assets from creditors by giving them to one's family, friends, or associates. The principles of the Statute of 13 Elizabeth and some of its language continue to be in wide use today. Under the common law, in action involving fraudulent conveyance, it was unnecessary to demote that a misrepresentation was made from a debtor to a creditor. An international fraudulent conveyance is not an inducement-based fraud. Rather, an international fraudulent conveyance involves a transfer to a close relative, a secret transfer, a transfer of title without possession, or for grossly inadequate consideration. The court further differentiated the type of fraud involved in an international fraudulent conveyance, and it stated, in such cases, the fraudulent conduct is not in dishonestly inducting a creditor to extend in a debt. It is the acts of concealment and hindrance. In the fraudulent conveyance context, therefore, the opportunities for a false representation from the debtor to the creditor are limited. The debtor may have the opportunity to put forward a false representation if the creditor inquires into the whereabouts of the debtor's assets, but that could hardly be considered a defining feature of this kind of fraud. Another important factor for including international fraudulent conveyance within the preview of actual fraud and bankruptcy code is that historically both the transferor and transferee were both liable for fraud. The transferee of an international fraudulent conveyance was liable to the debtor's creditors, though he or she had made no representation to the debtor's creditors. Historically, a false representation has never been required to impose liability for international fraudulent conveyance. The court rejected the debtor's argument that the court's interpretation would render Bankruptcy Code duplicate of Bankruptcy Code 523A/4 and 727A Bankruptcy Code 523/A exclusively encompasses fraud, while Bankruptcy Code 523A/4 covers fraud while acting in a fiduciary capacity. Moreover, Bankruptcy Code 523A.6 encompasses debts for malicious and willful injuries regardless of whether fraud was involved. Bankruptcy Code 523(2)(a) is concerned whether a particular debt is dischargeable. On the other hand, Bankruptcy Code 727 is concerned with whether a debtor should receive his or her discharge, and there is a 1 year of statute of limitations for this transfer in question. The debtor also contended that in order for a debt to be non-dischargeable under Bankruptcy Code 523, that the debt must be for money, property, services, or credit obtained by actual fraud. The court rejected this argument and it stated, it is, of course, true that the transferor does not obtain debts in the fraudulent conveyance, but the receipt of this transfer who with the requisite intent also commits fraud can obtain assets by his or her participation in the fraud. See McLean versus Cantrell, 217-27 AD 2000. I'm not sure. If the recipient later files for bankruptcy, any debts traceable to the fraudulent conveyance, see Field versus U.S. posed at 1591, will be non-dischargeable under 523. Thus, at least sometimes a debt non-dischargeable under 523. Such circumstances may be rare because a person who receives fraudulently conveyed assets is not necessarily, or even likely to be, a debtor on the verge of bankruptcy. But they make it clear that fraudulent conveyances are not wholly incompatible with the obtained by requirement. Footnote omitted. The debtor's final argument was that the phrase actual fraud was not inserted in the Bankruptcy Code 523 to expand on the preview of this statute, but rather to restrict the scope of the provision. The debtor's proposed interpretation of Bankruptcy Code was illogical because the statute is written in the disjunctive. The court's decision is consequential because it significantly expanded the scope of Bankruptcy Code 523 to include fraudulent schemes in which a material misrepresentation of fact is absent. One bankruptcy court has noted, husky implicitity, I'm not sure what that word is, overrules earlier Ninth Circuit decisions holding or implying that Section 523 is limited to common fraud. C. Etel versus Ishai, 1996. Husky also implicitly overrules decisions that the term false pretenses, false representation, and actual fraud are synonymous. The terms false pretenses and false representation have the same meaning in Section 523 as the term actual fraud. In consequence, they cannot provide a basis independent of actual fraud, finding a debt non-dischargeable. Takawaska versus Hayashi, 2016. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit plays an influential role in the development of consumer bankruptcy law throughout the United States. The overruling of the Ninth Circuit precedent is an important consequence of Husky. Husky will have a significant impact in the area of fraudulent conveyance litigation. Parties that engage in international fraudulent conveyances will now be subject to the actual fraud provision in Bankruptcy Code 523. Carlos J. Conveyances is a solo practitioner in Yonkers and a research associate with the University of Houston School of Law. Classification English. Publication type newspaper. Subject: Insolvency, Bankruptcy Law, Insolvency and Bankruptcy 90%, Fraud and Financial Crime 90%, Law, Courts and Tribunals 87%, Corporate Debt 78%, Litigation 78%, Financial Performance and Report 77%, U.S. Chapter 7 Bankruptcy 77%, Decisions and Rulings 73%, Supreme Court 72%, Organization Supreme Court of the United States 55%, Industry Corporate Bonds 75%, 72% Electronics, Geographic Texas USA 79%, United States 79%. Load date September 25th, 2017. And that's about it, guys. I'm gonna end it off here. Once again, I'll leave a link down in the description box below. Log for email. You can email us at themornings@gmail.com for private consultation. I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a nice day.